Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Elena, and I'm an educator here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. I am here live streaming to you today, and I am so excited for us to get this class started. It is one of my favorite classes. We're going to be doing a whale watch class today, which I don't know if you know anything about whales or about watching whales, but it is really fascinating and really fun. So I am really excited to get this started with you today. Now, before I begin, I am not alone here in the studio. I actually have a partner who's going to be on the other side, working all the magic that's going on behind me. So that's Courtney. Courtney is helping me out with all of that today, so thank you, Courtney. And Courtney is going to put up a link for you to go ahead and take a look at for if you have any questions or things that you want to share with us today during this live stream. Go ahead and text that live number 562-286-1838. And again, that's for if you have any questions during our live stream, which is happening right now at 10 a.m. on September 19th, 2023. If you have any live questions, you are more than welcome to text that number. If you are watching this a little bit later or at your own time, that is totally fine. And if you still have questions, we highly encourage you to go ahead and use that email that's at the very bottom, and it's live@lbaop.org. So again, if you're here with us right now during this time, you go ahead and feel free to use the text number. If you're joining us a little bit later, make sure that you use that email in order to ask us questions so that we can get back to you on those answers. So I'm very excited, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Courtney to put us out in the middle of the ocean, because that is where we're going to go ahead and start our journey together. So come along aboard, come join us on this boat. I'm going to go ahead and step off screen here so that you can kind of take a look and see, what do you notice? What are some things that maybe you see? Do you notice anything in particular? Do you maybe not notice a lot of things? I'm going to go ahead and give you about a minute or so to make those observations on what do you see. I know that I don't see a lot of things on the water. I notice that the sun kind of reflects on the water, which is really pretty. And the more I look in the distance, I don't see a lot of stuff. I see some clouds in the sky. I can kind of see the horizon where the water meets the sky. I don't notice a lot of waves. The water looks pretty calm. What kinds of things are you noticing? And again, you're more than welcome to go ahead and text us live or email us. So, being out on a boat doing a whale watch, it's actually really hard to find whales sometimes. Whales are really large mammals. They are marine mammals. So if you know what a mammal is, which is an animal that, or an organism that has warm blood, hair or fur, gives birth to live birth, drinks or eats milk. Those are all components that make a mammal a mammal. And so whales, being marine mammals, have those exact same things. Now, they look a little bit different because they are in the water most of the time. So they're not going to look exactly like how you and I do, especially because we're land mammals, we're terrestrial mammals. Marine mammals are equipped with a lot of different things in order to help them survive in their water habitat, but they still need some of those basic things in order to survive. They still need to come up for air. They still need to eat milk when they are young in order to get nice and healthy. They are actually born with some little patches of hair and fur to let mom know that they're ready to drink or eat the milk. But then that hair goes away as they get a little bit older. And then they do still have warm blood, which means that their body temperature needs to stay nice and warm. So that's why their bodies are covered in this really thick blubber in order to keep their bodies warm. So whales are marine mammals. They still have all of these things. And so there are some really key specific things that you and I can look for when trying to watch for whales and when looking for whales. So some of those things, one of them is actually splashing. So I'm going to go ahead and step off the screen here. We already noticed, we made observations that this water looks really calm, right? We already made those notes that maybe there's not a lot of waves going on. I don't see a lot of splashing. I don't see anything in the horizon or in the distance. I see no movement in this water at all. But if you were trying to watch for whales, you would be looking for splashing, and splashing of the water surface in particular. Because remember, whales are still marine mammals. So one of those things that they still need to come up for is air. They come up for air every so often. So splashing could be an indication of whales. It could also be an indication of dolphins. Now, dolphins are also marine mammals. I know, pretty crazy. They're also marine mammals. They are part of the whale family, but they're not exactly whales. So that's kind of a key distinction that we'll make a little bit later. But dolphins are part of the whale family. They're just not baleen whales, which we'll also get into that in a little bit. But yeah, splashing is one of those things that you could look for when you're out on a whale watch. Another thing you could look for is bird activity. If you see a lot of birds concentrated in one area, that typically means that there is food nearby. And usually the food is sometimes at the surface of the water, which, again, whales have to come up to the surface of the water, but then they'll also find their food at the surface of the water. And then the last thing that you typically look for is a whale spout. So that is kind of the puff of air that happens at the surface of the water when a whale comes up to breathe. So those are the three things that we're going to be looking for today when it comes to watching for whales. So we're going to go ahead and start with our first species, which we kind of already talked about a little bit earlier, but that's going to be our common dolphin. So let's go ahead and pull up our common dolphin picture, and we'll go ahead and see how we could see these animals out in a whale watching boat. Oh my goodness, look at these dolphins. They are so cute. Oh my goodness, there are so many of them. So dolphins are a resident species. These common dolphins are a resident species here in Southern California. And what resident means is that they just call this ocean, our part of the ocean, their home. It's their backyard, or it's our backyard, but their home. So they are resident species. They can be found all up and down our coast, and you can see them traveling in a pod here. So that's the name for a group of dolphins. They like to travel together. They are a communal species. They love hanging out with each other, and they love doing life together. So you will pretty much always find dolphins together with their pods, and something that they love to do, as you can see here, is they love to breach in the water. They love to jump out of the water. Dolphins are very, very playful. They are incredibly playful as marine mammals, and they love to jump in the wake of what boats have. So a lot of times you will find these common dolphins right behind a boat, splashing in the waves that the boat makes as it's driving through the water. So dolphins love to play in that, and they love to play with each other as well. They are a toothed whale. So I'll go ahead and explain kind of the difference between a baleen whale and a toothed whale. And to do that, I'm actually going to have us look at our dock cam. I have some special things for you that we're going to go ahead and get to see right now. So in your whale family, in your marine mammal whale family, you've got two main groups of animals. And I'm going to go ahead and put both of these things here for you to see. So one of them is a baleen whale, which is kind of the word I already mentioned a little bit earlier, and I didn't go too in depth with it. But this here is a piece of baleen. So baleen whales have this long kind of ridged stuff, and as you can see, I'm kind of moving this flexible part here. They've got this long stuff called baleen. So instead of having teeth in their mouths like you and I, they're going to have rows and rows and rows and rows of this really, really cool stuff called baleen. And that's because of the things that they eat. So they like to eat things like krill. They like to eat plankton. And I actually have some krill for you to see here. This is what krill looks like. So as baleen whales are getting their food, they're using this baleen to catch these little creatures. And so they'll swallow big amounts of water, and then they'll kind of push the water out with their tongue, and what will get caught in between their plates of baleen are actually the krill. And then they'll kind of take their tongue and scoop the inside of their mouth with the baleen and scoop all that yummy stuff so that they can eat it. So that is one part of the whale family, the baleen whale family. And they've got this stuff. It's made of keratin, kind of like our fingernail. So if you feel your fingernail, it's going to feel almost exactly like this baleen. The other part of the family is the toothed whale family. So this is a whale tooth. It's actually an orca tooth. But dolphins are part of the toothed family category. So they're going to have these rows of teeth that are pretty sharp and long in order to catch the food that they need. So let's go ahead and go back to our dolphin picture for just a second. And so dolphins are going to use the teeth in order to catch things like fish. They're going to eat maybe small pieces of squid. So they're going to be eating a lot more things like that that are pretty slippery and hard to catch and pretty fast. So they're going to make sure that their teeth are equipped for catching that food and being able to swim after it really quickly. And I'll even step off screen here so that you can see. They have really tall dorsal fins, which are those fins on the very tops of their body, and they have really big, strong, powerful tails that help propel them through the water. And the dorsal fin helps them make really sharp turns at a really fast pace because, again, they're going after things that are really slippery and really fast. So that's going to be one of the ways that they eat. And the way that you can tell who is who in the common dolphin family is by using color patterns and size. So I don't know if you can see here in this picture, but the dolphin that's kind of in the middle has like a light patch and a dark patch. So depending on the individual in the pod, their spots will look a little bit different. And so that's one of the ways that you can tell who is who in the dolphin pod, which I think is pretty cool because that makes them very unique. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to our next animal, which is going to be really cool. It is actually going to be our humpback whale. So a little bit different from our common dolphin. I'll go ahead and step off screen here so that you can see. But this humpback whale, go ahead and take a second. Do you think it's part of the baleen whale family or the toothed whale family? Go ahead and take a second to make your decision. You can even text in our number if you'd like. All right, I'm going to tell you the answer. In 3, 2, 1. They're part of the baleen whale family. If you guessed baleen, you are correct. And you can see here in this picture, this is a really good image of the baleen that you can find in the humpback whale's mouth and in pretty much all baleen whales' mouth. So I love humpback whales. They're really, really awesome to look at. They're really, really simple. You can see on the bottoms of their throats, and I'll go ahead and step on screen here to help you out and see. You see these like little kind of like pleats or lines on their throats. So those pleats help the humpback whale take a big gulp of water so that they can get all those krill that I showed you earlier. So those pleats allow the whale's mouth to open as much as it can, hold in as much water as it possibly can, just so they can get all that yummy food into their bodies. So that's another cool thing to know about baleen whales. A lot of the times they'll have that really big throat pouch to help them get as much food as possible. Now, humpback whales are baleen whales, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, and they like to migrate. So that means that they like to move from one place to another. And so they like to migrate to Southern California, which is our backyard here, and they'll eat a lot of things like krill and bait fish and other types of plankton. Now, the cool thing about humpback whales is their flukes, which are their tails, they have a really unique pattern to them. And I think we've got a picture here to show you. But their flukes are really, really awesome. They're unique to each whale. And so that's one of the things that you can look for when trying to ID or identify a specific humpback whale. And so I'll go ahead and step off so you can see here. But they have very unique and individualized flukes or tails. They also have really long pectoral fins. And I'll go ahead and show you on my body. So this is their fluke. It kind of moves in an up and down motion, just like those dolphins do. But their pectoral fins are kind of like if you had fins that were to your sides. So think of like an airplane. You know how the airplane has like the actual body of the plane that you sit in as a passenger? And then you notice the wings on an airplane, right? And what do you think the wings help the airplane do? Yeah, they help the airplane steer. Now, we'd never want to see the airplane wings flapping up and down like this, right? It doesn't really work like a bird. They tend to stick out straight and stay in one spot. So for whales, they do the exact same thing. They act, and you can see here a really good picture of a pectoral fin, but those pectoral fins essentially help the whale steer. And so they're not going to use those pectoral fins like a bird motion like I was showing you earlier. They're going to use them more to steer. Now, this is actually a really good picture to kind of lead into the next thing I want you to observe. But go ahead and look at their bodies for a second. Look at the texture on their body. What are you noticing? Does it look really smooth? Does it look really patchy? Does it look like maybe there's spots or dots or bumps? Maybe are you noticing smooth textures? So one of the things that I'm noticing is that this humpback whale has a lot of like bumps on its body. So you can see here on its pectoral fin, here's a bump right here. There's one that's a little bit bigger over here on this side. And then even closer to the front of its body, you see little bumps all around its mouth. So those bumps have an actual scientific name to them. Are you ready for it? They're called tubercles. Now you can practice saying the word tubercle. But tubercles are essentially little bumps where the hair follicles used to be on the whale. So remember I mentioned a little bit earlier that in order to be a mammal you had to have certain things, and one of those things is hair or fur. So we as people have hair on our heads, right? You can check your hair, make sure it's still there. You can look at your arm and see the hair on your arm. Now whales, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, are born with hair, and that's to signal to mom, hey, I'm ready to eat, whenever they're ready to eat their milk. But as they grow older, that hair goes away. So the tubercles are kind of the leftover hair follicles on a whale. And you can see all those bumps on its body where it used to hang out and where it used to be. It's pretty cool. I think that's a really unique feature about them. They love to fluke in the water, so they love to wave those tails up and down. They love to breach, which is when they haul their bodies out of the water and make big splashes. They also love to tail lob, and they love to pectoral slap. And a lot of those things is when they're just splashing the surface of the water. They just love to make splashes. And a lot of times they'll use that to stun their prey, which again, the prey are those teeny tiny little pieces of krill. So they'll do that as a feeding strategy. And another feeding strategy that I think is really cool about them that sometimes you can see if it's like a really good whale watching day and if you go at the right time and place, but you can actually see the whales, the humpback whales, lunge feed. Now, when I say the word lunge and feed, think of lunge as if you're like lunging at something, like you're throwing your whole body weight at something, and then feeding, which is they're eating. So what these humpback whales will do, and actually a lot of whales will use this as a feeding strategy, is they will kind of work together as a team. So there will be a really big cloud of krill in the water, pretty close to the surface, and some of the whales will actually start circling the krill in order to make all the krill stay in one place. And then there's one whale that will always start out at the bottom of the cloud of krill, and they'll shoot their bodies up through the cloud of krill, grab as much krill in water as they can, and they'll kind of poke out at the surface of the water. Sorry, the top of my screen is the surface of the water. They'll reach the surface of the water, they'll close those mouths, and then they'll slowly sink back into the water. And that is a lunge feeding strategy. And the really cool thing about humpback whales is they'll actually take turns doing this. That way everybody gets a chance to eat. But that's one of the strategies that they use to feed, which I think is really cool because you get to see not only all those like krill or sardines or small fish at the top of the water, but you'll also see them kind of taking turns and basically hauling their whole bodies out of the water, which whales weigh a lot. So that's a pretty cool sight to see. But yeah, that's a really cool thing about them. Now we're going to move on to our gray whale. I'll go ahead and wait for Courtney to go ahead and switch it to our gray whale. But the gray whales look a little bit like the humpback whales. I don't know if you can kind of see the similarities between the two. They're both very gray, but gray whales kind of look a little bit different. They've got more of these white patches on their body, and you can see it here. Go ahead and take a guess. Do we think this is a toothed whale, or do we think this is a baleen whale? I'll give you a second to kind of make your decision. What do we think? Maybe look inside its mouth. Do you see its mouth right there? What does it look like? Does it look more like teeth? Does it look more like baleen? All right, I'm going to tell you the answer in 3, in 2. They are baleen whales. So if you said baleen, excellent job. They are baleen whales. And you can actually see their plates of baleen right here. Now they kind of look a little bit like teeth, right? Maybe just a little bit, maybe the color. But they are in fact baleen whales. And so these whales like to specifically migrate from Alaska, which is really far north and really, really cold, all the way down to Baja California, which is even lower than where we live here in Long Beach in California. So they go really, really far south, and they only typically go south during the summer months, when it's really, really warm, spring, summer months, because they like to do their mating and have their babies and raise their babies in those warmer waters, and then eventually they will all travel back up to Alaska, which I think is kind of cool. I'll go ahead and step off screen here so you can see our lovely gray whale here. And if you do the math, it's about a 14,000 14,000-mile round trip, which I think is pretty crazy. I have a hard time swimming a really long distance, so I can't even imagine swimming 14,000 miles round trip. And that's not even taking into account any time that they have to stop or any time that they have to feed. So it's a long trip. It's kind of like if you go on a road trip with your family. It's a long trip sometimes. And what makes these gray whales really, really cool is, again, their type of feeding strategy. So they are also krill-eating creatures. They like to eat small crustaceans and krill, crustaceans being like little crabs or lobsters. So they like to do a lot of that. And they'll typically do it at the bottom of the water. So kind of in contrast to our humpback whale friends who will come up to the surface to eat food, our gray whale friends will typically eat at the bottom of the ocean. And so what they'll do is they'll take their mouths, since they're still full of baleen, they'll take their mouths, they'll open up their mouths, and they'll kind of scrape the bottom of the ocean floor. They'll scrape all that mud and that water, and they'll put that in their mouths, and then they'll kind of do the same thing where they get rid of that extra water and the extra mud, and the yummy stuff that's left over is all of their food. So that's their type of feeding strategy, which I think is really cool because it's kind of similar to our humpback whales with their lunge feeding strategy, but it's a little bit different and unique to them, which I think is really fascinating. And they also have a lot of barnacles on their body. And they actually also have whale lice all over their body. So you can see the texture of their bodies. They're really, really bumpy and kind of scaly looking sometimes. And they've got lots of little critters living on their bodies. And you can see here on the gray whale's body that they have a lot of spots and they have a lot of bumps. So that's another way that scientists can identify who is who when it comes to looking at these whales in larger groups, which I think is really unique and fascinating. And you can see here that the whale is actually, it's doing that thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier, which they are spouting out that water, that excess water. It's kind of how they breathe. So that's how they come up to the surface and they get their air as mammals. And you can see in this video that they actually have two holes on the tops of their head. That's like basically if you took your nose, and after a really long evolutionary time, your nose slowly started traveling to the top of your head. Because think about how many times the whales will have to come up to the surface for air. Over time, their bodies just decided, hey, our nose is going to hang out on the top of our head because it's way easier to come up and breathe for air than if we were to stick our whole nose out of the water every single time. And they can still swim and breathe, which I think is pretty cool, since their noses are on top of their head. But yeah, it's really cool. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to our next whale friend, our next watch for whale friend, which you can see sometimes on a whale watch. I'll give you a second. Do you know the name of this whale? Did you even know this was a whale? Did you know that this is actually a dolphin? I'll go ahead and give you a second to think of the name of this whale. What kind of whale do you think this is? Maybe you already know. I'll go ahead and give you 3 seconds, and then I'm going to tell you the name. 3, 2, 1. These are orcas! Orcas, or otherwise known as killer whales. These are orcas. They're really, really fascinating. They are one of the cooler whales, I think. They're one of my favorite whales, I should say. But they're really cool. But they are, in fact, part of the dolphin family. So they're going to be a little bit different than those other whales that we talked about earlier. So what do you think? I'm going to go ahead and step off screen. Do you think that these are baleen whales, or do you think these are toothed whales? I'll go ahead and give you a second to make your decision. I know this one doesn't have an open mouth, but that's because it's going to be a surprise. What do we think? Do we think it's a toothed whale or a baleen whale? Okay, I'm going to tell you the answer. In 3, 2, 1. They are toothed whales. They are toothed whales. You can see here a really good picture of their beautiful teeth that they have in their mouths. So very similar to the common dolphins that we saw earlier, orcas are going to have those really long, sharp teeth in order to catch all the food that they like to eat. And I'm actually going to send us over to our dot cam for a second so that we can look at the orca tooth. Because if you remember, at the very beginning of our time together, I told you already that this is an orca tooth. So they'll have these types of teeth all along their mouths in order to catch those things like fish and squid. and even other types of things, which we'll get into in a second. But can you imagine if your teeth were this big? This is my thumb, and it's even bigger than my thumb. This is the tooth in the palm of my hand, and it's almost as big as my whole hand, which I think, or as long as my whole hand. I think that's pretty cool. But yeah, so again, here's the difference between the baleen and the tooth. So our orca friends are going to have those rows of teeth. Multiple teeth. So let's go ahead and go back to our picture of the orca for a second. So orca whales are really, really hard to see on whale watches. They're like pretty rare to find, but they have been spotted at some points in time. They're really, really cool. And they are part of the tooth family. Again, like I mentioned, they're the largest of the dolphin family. So thinking back to our common dolphin, those are about 6.5, maybe 7 feet. These guys are really, really big. They're about 20 feet, I believe, 15 to 20 feet. Now, within the orca family, you have a lot of different types of orcas. You have like subspecies of orca. If you've ever heard of that word before, it just means that there's different types. So one of the types of orcas that you can find, one of the different populations you can find is resident. So when you hear that word resident, maybe you've heard of that word before, but a resident orca typically means that they like to stay in one area. They'll usually hang out in the Pacific Northwest, so that's anywhere off the coast of like Washington or Oregon, or even like really northern parts of California. They like to hang out in one spot. They're like homebodies. They like to stay in one area that they know really well. And they will typically eat salmon or fish. So they'll use those teeth to catch those big slippery fish in order to eat their food. Now, there's another population of orcas, which is pretty cool, and those are called transient orcas. Maybe you've heard of that word transient before, but that kind of means that they like to move around a little bit. They like to go from place to place. So this is a migratory species of orca, and they'll like to move up and down the coast, the west coast here. And they are mammal eaters. So they're going to eat things like seals and sea lions. They'll eat things like sea otters. So their appetite is a little bit different than those resident orcas, who are kind of more geared towards eating the squid and the fish. So the transient like to eat things that are a little bit bigger and have a lot more nutrients in them as far as like size goes. So transient orcas are really cool. And then our last group is actually going to be the eastern tropical Pacific orcas, which they like to come up to our waters here in Southern California, but they travel from the south. So they hang out in warm water, in the South tropical water, South Pacific tropical water, and they'll come up to our coast to do some feeding as well. They'll come up to our little bit cooler waters from those warmer waters, and again, they like to eat things like seals and sea lions. There's no sea otters that far south, but they like to eat things that, again, are just a little bit bigger, and sometimes they're actually known for eating sharks as well, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, so in your orca family, in your orca whale population, you have those different types of marine mammals, orcas, that will eat different things depending on where they live. They are incredibly intelligent. So since orcas are part of the dolphin family, dolphins in general are just really, really smart. They are really, really good at staying in their pod. They work together with each other. They are a communal species. So they'll work together to get their food, where they'll kind of do the same thing that humpbacks whale do, which they'll like circle their food and then take turns swimming through it to get their bites of food. But they are also known to be a tool-using species, just like the common dolphins or bottlenose dolphins. They are really, really intelligent, and they just know how to work their surroundings. They know how to work with what they've got, and they know how to survive best in their habitat, wherever that may be. So friends, we're going to go back to our open ocean scene, and we're going to go ahead and conclude our time together. Our whale watch time is up, but you can actually go on a whale watch in real life. Did you know that? You can go out on a boat, and you can try to look for all of these animals. And you can kind of look for those things that we talked about earlier, which is like splashing at the surface, bird activity, any breaching that happens out of the water where they haul out of the water and make a big splash. And you can even look for those whale spouts that we saw earlier, where the whale comes up to breathe and it kind of spits out all this stuff. And you can look for all of those things next time you're out on a whale watch. So again, we have our text live questions here. If you have any questions during our presentation, which I know it has now come to an end, but you can still go ahead and text us at 562-286-1838. And if you're watching this again a little bit later, please feel free to use the email live@lbaop.org. I'm so happy that you could come aboard and join me today on this whale watch. I am so excited that we were able to do this and see a lot of cool things today and even learn about a lot of cool animals today, specifically some of those marine mammals that we talked about. And hopefully now you have a better understanding of those baleen whales versus toothed whales and kind of all the cool tricks that they have up their sleeves in order to survive in their habitat out here in the open ocean. So thank you so much again for joining me today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If we have any classrooms or teachers watching, if you could please text us the number of students that you had in your class today, that way we can know how many were able to participate. That would be awesome. And again, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day.